A man who stepped only 50 yards away to fetch water and disappeared forever. That is how one can describe that incredible and eerie story that happened near the Nantahala River in North Carolina on June 18, 2013. At first, none of the tourists suspected that a calm summer evening, gentle sunshine, and the sound of splashing water would turn into one of the most mysterious disappearances, which is still talked about by the locals. Only a few steps separated 34-year-old Mark Evans from the campground and his friends, but those steps were the last anyone saw or heard of him. What happened on that clear evening when a man literally vanished into thin air in the middle of a friendly group of people just meters from his own tent? Why did a 12-day search involving the rescue services yield not a single result? And how to explain those strange clues that only confused the situation even more? On June 18, 2013 in northwestern North Carolina, the weather was clear. The sun was shining, the daytime temperature was plus 28 degrees C, and forecasters did not anticipate any significant changes. On this day, a group of 6 hikers stopped by the gentle bank of the Nantahala River. They knew each other with varying degrees of familiarity, but had decided to join together for a couple nights away from the city. With a campfire, guitar, swimming, and heart-to-heart talks. There were 6 people in that group. 34-year-old Mark Evans, always energetic and adventurous, who had already proven to be an excellent camping organizer. 31-year-old Natalie Johnson, a friend of Mark's since college. 39-year-old Greg Morris, who had hiked several times in neighboring states and worked with Mark. 28-year-old Anna Kowalski, an acquaintance of Natalie's and a newcomer to camping. 36-year-old David Carter, a longtime friend of Greg's who is a rock climbing enthusiast. And finally, 27-year-old Lucy Morgan, a yoga instructor and nature lover who had never been on an extended camping trip before. They arrived at the site in the afternoon when the sun was at its zenith and, having chosen a conveniently flat spot by the shore, began to set up for the night. By evening, the company had already prepared dinner and sat around the fire, discussing plans for the next day. The time of sunset had come, and the forest was gradually sinking into a cool twilight. There was a calm, even peaceful atmosphere all around. At about 1930, Mark, noticing that their water supply was almost exhausted, suggested that they go to the river to get a couple more jerry cans and not mess around this morning. The distance from camp to the water was no more than 50 meters, with a straight path visible between the trees. He picked up the canister, said something like, "Now I'll get fresh water for the morning," and set off to the river alone. No one thought to escort him. It was literally a couple minutes' walk. But it was this short journey that proved fatal. Normally, it took no more than 5 or 6 minutes to reach the shore and draw water. 10 minutes had passed and still no Mark. No one was particularly nervous, thinking that perhaps he had stopped by the water to admire the sunset or had gotten distracted. After another 5 minutes, however, Natalie and Greg decided to go after him, because it would be dark soon. When they reached the shore, all they saw was an empty canister lying on the gravel. There was no water in it, and Mark was nowhere to be seen. Shouting and calling his name was useless. There was no answer. The forest was silent. Greg, searching the shrubs along the shoreline, saw no obvious shoe prints in the wet sand. Natalie had claimed that the sand was soft enough to hold footprints well before. But there was hardly anything there, she recalled. It was as if Mark hadn't made it all the way to the shore at all. Returning to the others, Natalie and Greg reported that Mark was nowhere to be found. The others rushed out to look for him. Some went along the river, others deep into the woods. Everyone called out for Mark, but to no avail. The minutes passed, it grew darker, and the anxiety grew. By 20 o'clock, it was clear that he was not coming back. No one heard any screams, no noise of falling, no splash of water. At 21 o'clock, it was decided to act according to the plan. 2 guys went to the car to call the rescuers. The local search and rescue service in Swain County responded quickly. By midnight, the sheriff and his deputies and several volunteers were on the scene. They conducted a nighttime search of the coastal area, even as the weather began to deteriorate, with fog creeping in from the mountains and cooler temperatures in the woods. In the dark, the results were nil. No obvious clues, much less signs of a struggle or cries for help. On the morning of June 19th at dawn, Cynologists with dogs arrived, and divers arrived to survey the riverbed. The plan was clear. A part of the team would check every meter on the bank and in the nearest bushes, another would investigate the water, and the third would send out groups along forest trails with a radius of up to 5 kilometers. However, from the very beginning, the rescuers encountered an inexplicable difficulty. The dogs did not pick up a single clear trail. Where Mark should have passed, the smell broke off just a few meters from the camp. The next day, as the search expanded, a volunteer named Jaden Scott discovered another detail. It was a windbreaker lying on dry ground in a thicket about 1.5 kilometers downstream. Nearby lay a lone sock, also in near-perfect condition. The friends who identified the clothes claimed that Mark had worn a similar windbreaker the day he disappeared, though he hadn't really needed it in the morning because of the heat. The question was, why were these items so far away, and why in an area already checked previously? The day before, when the searchers had gone through there, the windbreaker and sock were gone. Those who preferred rational explanations suggested that Mark, if he was still alive and in a disoriented state, might have scattered his clothes himself. But then the question remained, why? And if someone else had done it, for what purpose? No traces of blood or signs of a struggle were found on the windbreaker, and the dogs did not pick up the trail again, as if the person who had left it had vanished. Police reports and volunteers' recollections repeatedly mentioned the fog, which was forecast to be light and short-lived, but turned out to be too thick and dense. Every morning, starting on June 19th, it rolled in streaks, blocking visibility for several meters. According to some searchers, it felt like it was easy to lose one's bearings in this fog. People were confused about directions, even though they were usually good with a map and compass. Of course, skeptics believe this is a common natural phenomenon of mountainous terrain, but most participants recalled that they had never seen fog that thickened so quickly and so densely. More curiously, telephone communication in the camp area was becoming unstable, although no signal problems had been reported before. Interference and noise in the radios made coordination of the search more difficult. Some volunteers ended up recircumnavigating areas that had already been surveyed to avoid missing any possible traces of the missing person. From the perspective of his surroundings and family, Mark did not appear to be a person prone to suicide or sudden flight. He had a stable job in the marketing department of a small firm, had plans for a wedding next year, and was looking forward to this summer vacation, according to friends. Some relatives recalled that Mark sometimes complained of insomnia or that he had recently become anxious, but he had no serious problems or reasons to disappear. When Mark's parents joined the search, they tried to explain to the police that their son had good stamina and would definitely not dare to leave without notice. In addition, all his personal belongings, phone, wallet, documents, were left in the tent. The family persuaded the rescuers to expand the search for dozens of kilometers, but alas, it did not yield any results. For almost 2 weeks, the area of the Nantahala River turned into the epicenter of search operations. Every day, rescuers went around the forest, divers checked the flow of the river, helicopters and drones with cameras and thermal imaging cameras took to the sky. However, no body, no living person, no new leads. The dogs lost the trail again and again near the camp, as if Mark had ceased to exist a few meters from the campfire. The friends who remained on the spot all this time went through many stages, from shock and panic to the agonizing realization that the chances of finding Mark alive were rapidly vanishing. They had to give interviews to journalists who picked up on the mystery disappearance sensation, but there was no breakthrough in the case. One after another, the theories of accident, wild animal attack, or attack by criminals fell away. Not a single trace of violence, blood, or struggle was recorded. Locals and individual enthusiasts began to refer to the case as the Missing 411 series. This unofficial term refers to cases in which people disappear in conditions seemingly minimal for misfortune, near a group of companions, in clear weather, in clear and not too difficult terrain. No trace is left behind, and later, sometimes the missing person's belongings turn up in strange places, in perfect condition with no apparent reason for being there. The story of Mark Evans quickly became one of those things they say. It's as if a person walked through an invisible door and left reality. Of course, no one officially claimed mystical or paranormal phenomena, but the cumulative details led people to the most fantastic speculations. After 14 days of continuous searching, the Swain County Sheriff issued a statement suspending the active phase. "We have tried every method available. No new evidence related to missing Mark Evans has been found." At the same time, the case was not closed, but search teams have curtailed their work. Mark's family and friends continued to urge volunteers to keep going for some time, but eventually it became clear to everyone that the situation had reached a dead end. Later that fall, in the same area, a local hunter reported smelling a strong odor of decomposition near the edge of the woods. He hoped it might be the body of a missing hiker and called the police. It ended up being the remains of a deer. No more human tracks were found at that spot. This happened several more times in the following months. All such signals turned out to be false. To reporters who continued to inquire, the sheriff replied that the case remains open, but without new evidence there was nothing to investigate. Over time, the story ceased to attract mass attention, replaced by other news stories. Friends of Mark from time to time gave interviews to specialized programs, telling about their version of events. But there was no consensus. Someone believed that he could fall into the water. Someone blamed unknown forces. Someone in despair talked about a mental breakdown. It is often said that in such disappearances, the worst thing is not the fact of disappearance, but the complete uncertainty, when there is neither a body nor any credible explanation. People are left with the agonizing question, what really happened? In the case of Mark Evans, that question hangs around the Nantahala River to this day, and the answer seems to have been swallowed up by the same evening fog that so suddenly covered the banks the day he disappeared. She dreamed of summiting and disappeared without a trace. That's how local newspapers later described the disappearance of 27-year-old Emily Harris, who on September 5, 2099, went on a solo hike up Mount Katahdin in Maine. No one could have predicted that the sunny skies and calm weather would turn into one of the most mysterious disappearances in the history of this popular hiking trail. Emily was born and raised in northern Maine. According to relatives, she had a lifelong love of mountains and the outdoors. Having earned a vacation at her firm, the girl decided to spend it unconventionally, to make a solo trip to Katahdin, to take a break from the noisy city and test her own strength. Her family discouraged her from going solo, but Emily was confident. The route didn't seem too difficult, and the weather promised to be clear and warm. For the first couple of days, she sent regular short messages to her family. All is well, the summit is near, the view is fabulous. Especially happy was the last message, which came on the morning of September 5th, where Emily wrote that she was already on the summit and was about to start her descent. The family felt relieved because the main goal, the conquest of the mountain, her daughter has fulfilled. However, the connection was cut off. Attempts to call or get a message back were fruitless, and a day later the relatives became seriously worried and reported her missing to the emergency services. Rescuers immediately went to the area of Mount Katahdin. The first thing they did was to find Emily's tent. It was in the intermediate camp on a gentle slope, almost perfectly pitched and with no signs of disorder. Inside were almost all of her personal belongings, her papers, purse, some of her clothes, and even a notebook where Emily had made notes on the progress of her journey. It looked as if the mistress was about to return. There were no signs of struggle, blood, or scraps of clothing around. Everything looked quiet and untouched. At first, search teams assumed an accident. For example, Emily could have fallen off the slope while descending. Over the course of a week, rescuers and volunteers combed the main trails and dangerous areas known for rock piles. Service dogs were brought in, but they did not pick up any clear trail. Helicopters with rescuers on board flew over the mountain and valley several times, but found no body or brightly colored fragments of clothing. The weather remained good the whole time, which theoretically made the search easier. As the days went by, no clues emerged. Another question was why Emily had left most of her belongings in the tent if she had only planned a short climb and a quick descent. It seemed as if she had indeed returned from the summit, and for some reason had only had time to only partially change outfits and then left in an unknown direction. However, the dogs did not pick up any fresh odors near the camp. The search continued for several weeks, and locals who knew the mountain well joined in, but each day brought only disappointment. No sign of Emily, no new leads. At the end of September, the official operation was over. Relatives were never able to find out what happened after her daughter sent a reassuring message from the summit. Today, years later, Mount Katahdin continues to attract tourists. But Emily Harris's story has become a grim reminder that even in perfect weather and on a relatively easy route, a person can disappear without a trace. Her open tent and neatly packed belongings are still remembered by local rescuers as a symbol of a mysterious disappearance that may remain unsolved. The section of the trail known as Dragon's Tooth has been attracting hikers for years. It's part of a larger trail through the Virginia mountains and is famous for the beauty that the local terrain is packed with. The name refers to the sharp and narrow rock ledges overhanging the chasms, like the protruding fangs of a monster frozen in eternal guard. That's where three buddies decided to go. 42-year-old Jonathan Clark, 38-year-old Paul Stanton, and 41-year-old Michael Mike Green. All three were experienced travelers but not professionals. They already had several climbs under their belt together, such as the trail on Old Tosca in North Carolina, a walk in the mountains near Seattle, and easier routes in the Blue Ridge region. Jonathan was the most thoughtful of the trio. He was a keen landscape photographer, a collector of rare images, and a frequent blogger about the intricacies of hiking. That day, April 12, 2015, was cool and slightly foggy in the morning, but with a promising forecast. The weather forecasters said that the clouds would clear by noon, and the hikers would have an almost cloudless day. Jonathan, Paul, and Mike had hiked part of the trail the day before, making a small bivouac near an easily accessible site. They had to contend with dampness during the night, but that didn't put them out of action. By dawn, everyone was in high spirits, and the most interesting part of the trail lay ahead, with views that locals said were breathtaking. Around 7 in the morning, they rolled up camp and set off. Jonathan walked ahead, stopping constantly to catch another shot on his DSLR. "You're going to fall behind again because of the pictures," Paul jokingly scolded, trying to keep up the pace. Mike, usually the most silent of the two, was following the route on the map and estimating how many hours it would take them to get around the entire planned segment. At Dragon's Tooth, they planned to linger to take a general picture with the protruding cliffs in the background. No one noticed anything sinister in the atmosphere of those hours. On the contrary, an elevated mood prevailed. The tops of the mountains were barely visible through the morning haze, and the forests around them were coming to life after the cold weather. Jonathan, as usual, became the chronicler of their journey, often asking his friends to pause to capture an interesting tree root or the falling light on a mossy rock. His camera was a trusted companion on such outings, and never failed. As they approached the Dragon's Tooth area, it was clear. The day was going to be clear, and the view was going to be amazing. Jonathan's plan was to catch the moment when the sun's rays hit the fangs of the rocks at a certain angle, creating dark shadows and bright highlights at the same time. By then, Paul and Mike were getting a little tired of stopping. Not that they didn't enjoy the photography, but they had hoped to go faster. At about 12:30, as the data on the camera they found later showed, the friends stopped for a quick snack. Jonathan apparently took some pictures from an unusual angle, showing part of their trail and the distant mountains in the haze. These photos were later scrutinized by the police, but nothing suspicious appeared in them. The men drank water, snacked on sandwiches, and moved on. Around 1 p.m., they reached a key point, a lookout point in close proximity to prominent rock ledges. Here the trail makes an arc as it passes along the cliff face. According to Paul, Jonathan was literally glowing with excitement. He said it was like this place was made for a photographer, a perfect composition. However, the friends realized that the route would be a little more challenging. They would have to climb a sharp rise and stay away from slippery ledges. It was nothing extreme. You just had to be careful. After another 20 minutes, the trail turned steeply at one point behind a cliff. Jonathan asked the two of them to go ahead while he took some more pictures, and then he would catch up with them in a few minutes. This had happened more than once on the trails, so no one saw it as a problem. Paul and Mike nodded and moved on. After 10 minutes, however, they noticed that Jonathan had not caught up with them. At first, they decided to wait. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, nothing. When they turned around, none of them saw him on the corner, and they did not hear any shouts. Paul suggested they go back. Maybe he got stuck on a slippery spot or dropped something. Mike agreed, and they set off back along the section they had traveled. But when they reached the place where they had last seen him, Jonathan was gone. But his camera was lying peacefully on the trail, a meter away from the cliff. It was the last point where they found anything belonging to the missing man. Jonathan himself had disappeared. It was like he vanished, Paul would later say. They checked the nearest bushes, peered over the rock ledge, called, shouted, all to no avail. Paul and Mike realized the joke was over. A quick check showed that there were no visible signs of a fall or snapped branches nearby, and there was no blood. However, the cliff around them looked extremely dangerous, and it was possible that Jonathan might have fallen off. Trying to find something, the friends cautiously looked around the edge of the cliff. There were clumps of rocks and bushes visible below, but nothing to indicate Jonathan's presence. As far as they could, they shouted into the void, but the answer was only the ricochet of their own echoes. Time passed, and the day waned toward late afternoon. In the Virginia woods, spring sunset doesn't come too early, but the friends knew they had a limited amount of time to find the missing man. Finally, Paul picked up his cell phone, but there was no signal. Mike moved a little higher to where the trail widened and tried to get a connection there. Finding a weak connection, he called the emergency services, explaining the situation. The emergency services asked them to stay put, conserve their phone charge, and wait for the first responders to arrive. Mike and Paul tried not to go far away. What if Jonathan was somewhere nearby, just traumatized? But no matter how many times they called, no matter how many times they looked in different corners of the trail, there were no answers. A couple hours later, around 4 in the afternoon, 2 forest rangers who had been sent to make a preliminary assessment of the situation came to them. They reported that a larger team would be arriving by evening and began their own superficial inspection. The rescue operation had already begun on the night of April 13th. Experienced climbers, professional volunteers, and Forest Service workers pulled in. Duty teams with stretchers and medical equipment were brought from the nearest town. The idea was to check every crevice and every piece of rocky slope. Could Jonathan have fallen or gotten stuck without losing consciousness but unable to speak? Unfortunately, the night took its toll. A chilly wind blew, light rain fell, and the trails became slippery. We decided to postpone the search until dawn, limiting ourselves to a rope survey of a few nearby ledges. As a result, by the time the main team arrived in the morning, there were about 20 people ready to comb the area. Mike and Paul were shocked but braced themselves. They had to tell the authorities exactly how their friend had disappeared and help them navigate where they had last seen him. First of all, they checked the cliff itself. The 3 climbers went down, using every precaution. For half an hour they studied the slopes, shining flashlights into caves, looking under ledges. Nothing. Not a piece of clothing, not a human body, not the slightest sign that anyone had fallen. The dogs, who had been brought in on purpose, took a sniff of Jonathan's belongings, something from a backpack found later near their camp, but couldn't identify a sure trail. The territory was combed in a radius of several kilometers. The forest, uphill trails, places where theoretically he could turn off. After all, if Jonathan had decided to leave the main route for some reason, why not go to the side trails? But all to no avail. The volunteers did not hear any screams, nor did they find any broken branches, traces of a fire, or any human markings. Meanwhile, police seized a camera left on the trail. It was a Canon DSLR that Jonathan liked to take on hikes. Inside was a memory card that contained a number of pictures taken just half an hour before the disappearance. There were no signs of damage to the camera body, although the lens was slightly dusty. Paul said Jonathan usually wore it on a strap and was unlikely to have accidentally dropped it, especially so neatly, somewhere off to the side of the trail. Police have studied the latest images. A few shots showed Mike walking forward, a view of the landscape with Dragon's Tooth stretching off to somewhere further away. The last photo, judging by the date and time in the metadata, was taken at about 1308. It shows a fragment of rock and a patch of sky. The photo seems to have been taken at a strange angle, as if Jonathan had accidentally pressed a button. No mysterious figures, no silhouettes, no animals. No signs of struggle or panic were captured by the photo. It was like a random shot. This increased the mystical halo around the disappearance. If he was not carried away by the current, there is no river here, or kidnapped by an unknown intruder, no signs of struggle, no screams. If he had, for example, fainted or had a mental breakdown, why did he go nowhere? But the dogs checked the trail further along the route, and again, nothing. The police officially recorded disappearance under unknown circumstances in their report. Jonathan Clark was not an extreme or reckless man. He enjoyed hiking, but his friends described him more as a careful traveler. He was unmarried, living with a girl named Sarah Blake, who later told reporters that Jonathan was the calmest and most rational person she knew. He never complained of mental illness, nor did he talk about wanting to escape from life. On the contrary, he had plans: a trip to Hawaii, a desire to publish a photo album. There was also no suggestion that he could have arranged the disappearance on his own. Money accounts, phone. Nothing indicated activity after April 12th. No bank had received a request for withdrawals. His cell phone never connected to the networks. All of Jonathan's personal belongings, wallet, car, which were left in the parking lot at the foot of the trail, remained intact. The police ruled out the criminal version between the friends, because Paul and Mike were in tears, begging everyone to find Jonathan, and were extremely depressed about what had happened. Local residents interviewed by reporters said that Dragon's Tooth sometimes gives unpleasant surprises. Someone gets lost in the fog, someone goes off the wrong path, falls and gets injured. But it was the first time that a person disappeared in a couple of minutes in a viewable area, leaving his camera behind. Meanwhile, the story of Jonathan's disappearance has shaken up the neighborhood. Volunteers and rescuers launched a major campaign using quadcopters and a helicopter to survey the surrounding neighborhood from high above. For the next 3 days, Dragon's Tooth was buzzing with activity like it may have never been there before. It seemed impossible not to find a missing person within a radius of a few kilometers with such resources. But all the efforts were fruitless. The thermal imaging cameras showed nothing, and the noises and shouts that had been used to call Jonathan were drowned in the echoes of the forest. Moreover, it seemed strange that there was no sign of alarm, even in the place where the camera had been found. The ground was rocky. No footprints could be discerned there, but neither were there any scratches characteristic of a human fall or struggle. About a week after the disappearance, they called in the cinematologists with dogs from a neighboring county, perhaps more experienced or trained for such cases. They again did not pick up a distinct odor, although they reacted to the personal belongings of the missing person at the start. The odor was lost within a few meters of where the camera lay. It was as if the person disappeared without a single sound. As the head of the search operation said, "Usually, when someone disappears in the mountains, we find at least the slightest clues, prints, scraps of cloth, freshly broken branches, nothing here. It's a rare case where we can only wonder where the missing person has gone." After about 3 weeks, the full-scale search began to wind down. The official police statement included the wording, "A person is missing under unclear circumstances. Further operations are inconclusive." What really happened to Mark Evans on the banks of the Nantahala River? Where did Emily Harris disappear to on Mount Katahdin? And why did Jonathan Clark never return from the Dragon's Tooth Trail? These questions remain unanswered to this day. Perhaps humans sometimes get too close to the mysteries that nature carefully hides from us. If you have your own versions of these mysterious disappearances, be sure to post them in the comments. Don't forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel not to miss new incredible stories. Take care and see you in the next episodes. How do you explain that a person can disappear in perfect weather conditions and in front of his friends, and then weeks later, his body turns up where it has been searched for dozens of times? Or how does a girl manage to disappear from a simple mountain path in a matter of minutes, and later find herself on a sheer cliff, which is impossible to climb without special equipment? These questions still stir the imagination of anyone who has ever heard of unfathomable disappearances on U.S. hiking trails. Two stories, James Carter and Emily White, are just the tip of the iceberg of mysterious cases, which, as if streamlined by madness, are woven into reality and question the usual logic and common sense. The name of 29-year-old James Carter has long appeared in police reports and news summaries of eastern Tennessee. His disappearance in early May 2014 shocked not only family and friends, but the entire local tourist community. It would seem that the Appalachian Trail, a place where tens of thousands of hikers pass every year, where the route is well marked and abundant with parking lots, does not pose any particular difficulties for people with an average level of physical fitness. However, there are many cases of people disappearing into thin air under seemingly ideal conditions. James's case is one of those that are still discussed in forums and groups dedicated to mysterious disappearances on tourist routes in the United States. In this story, several things were striking at once. Perfect clear weather, a reliable crew, no signs of panic or accident for hours, and suddenly, as if in an instant, a man went missing. Even stranger is the fact that James's body was found 2 weeks later, just 2 kilometers from the trail, in a place that had been checked repeatedly and very thoroughly by both volunteers and professional rescuers during the search operation. The cause of death has never been officially determined, and there were no traces or clues to indicate its nature. James Carter was born in 1985 in a small town near Knoxville, Tennessee. His parents remember him as a quiet but inquisitive boy who loved the outdoors. In his teenage years, he became interested in cross-country running and then hiking. His family noted his keen interest in the Appalachian Trail. He read reports from 300 milers and 1,000-kilometerers, people who had hiked large segments of the trail, studied the advice of the old-timers, and dreamed of one day hiking the entire distance. By his mid-20s, James had already hiked several medium-difficulty hikes with friends. His friend and traveling companion, Tom Pearson, described James as cautious but determined. He never took unnecessary risks and took safety very seriously. He checked the weather forecast, carried a basic first aid kit, and knew how to navigate by map and compass. Although his technical skills, mountaineering or extreme hiking, were average, his overall experience allowed him to confidently navigate popular sections of the Appalachian Trail. At the time of his disappearance, James was working for a small design firm in Chattanooga. He could afford to travel periodically because his schedule was relatively flexible. According to those close to him, he was planning a short spring hike on the trail in the company of 2 old acquaintances, Eric Robertson, 30, and Matt Kendrick, 28. He'd known both of them for more than 5 years. They'd been on short outings together before, and everything seemed safe and normal. The official start date for the hike was May 3, 2014. Trinity gathered in one of the parking lots at the entrance to the section of the Appalachian Trail that is closer to East Tennessee. According to eyewitness recollections, the day was a typical spring day. Clear skies, a light breeze, and temperatures around 20 degrees Celsius, with no hint of sudden change. There were no warnings of storms or heavy rain in the next 24 hours. James, Eric, and Matt took the standard set of equipment: tents, sleeping bags, food for 3 or 4 days, light clothes for warmth, and warm clothes for nights that might still be cool. The guys' phones were charged, but the signal on the Appalachian Trail was periodically lost. Since this is a known feature of mountainous areas, no one considered it a problem, much less something abnormal. On the evening of May 3rd, the company camped at one of the trail's markers, an official parking lot with a fire pit and a level area for tents. Several groups of hikers were already there, eager to talk to the new arrivals. Eric later recalled, "Everything was as normal as possible. We met the guys who were heading north. We chatted, some shared their stories. There were no alarms. The next day, May 4th, the weather was the same. The sun was shining. The temperature was up to plus 25 degrees C, and it promised to be a beautiful day for walking." The 3 buddies were walking along the trail, talking often, joking, stopping to take a couple of pictures. By lunchtime, they wanted to complete a certain section of the trail and planned a place for a second overnight stay. At about 10:30 a.m., James walked a little ahead, as is often the case in a group of people with different walking speeds, some going faster, some slower. He was one of the hardiest, so sometimes he would leave his friends behind for a few hundred meters and then wait for them at a convenient part of the trail. According to Eric, at this time they discussed that they would check on the navigator in about half an hour. The path followed a gentle upward slope overlooking a valley overgrown with young spring forest. Around 10:45 to 10:50, Eric and Matt noticed that they couldn't see James up ahead. Usually, he either stopped at a viewpoint or made himself known by voice. They sped up, thinking he might have moved farther ahead. For the next couple of minutes, the boys moved at a practically jogging pace until they reached the spot that James seemed to have to occupy if he'd just gone ahead. But he wasn't there. Eric and Matt didn't panic at first. They thought that perhaps James had stepped aside out of natural necessity or decided to take photos from a ledge just off the trail. They called out to him by name, but there was no response. They looked behind the nearest rocks, checked the trail leading down into the small bed of a dried-up creek, but James was nowhere to be found. The situation looked like gone in minutes. Realizing something was wrong, Eric and Matt called 911, but the signal was lost almost immediately. It wasn't until the second time, a little higher up on the ridge, that Eric was able to briefly tell the dispatcher that they were missing a friend and give an approximate location on the trail. The dispatcher replied that the nearest rangers were on their way and to stay in touch. The boys decided to take a look around the area on their own first, without straying too far from the trail. It was noon, clear skies, and visibility was excellent. One would have thought that if James had fallen or been injured, he would have raised his voice, would have heard the screams. But the forest was silent. There were no noises, no signs of a struggle, no footprints to indicate that James had taken a wrong turn. About an hour after the first call, two rangers, Jacob Hill and Ron Murphy, who had managed to ride their ATVs to the nearest descent to the Appalachian Trail, joined them on the trail. They questioned Eric and Matt about the details and then informed them that a search and rescue team would be pulling up by evening along with the K-9 unit, and possibly a helicopter would be involved, weather permitting. Throughout the day, the rangers checked the slope below the trail, descending steep sections. Ropes were used for insurance, but at the bottom, no man, no clothes, no footprints. In parallel, Eric and Matt surveyed the area to the north, thinking James might have accidentally gone that way. Several other rangers joined them in the evening, but the day ended with a complete lack of results. As of the morning of May 5th, the area of the disappearance was literally flooded with search crews. According to Monroe County Sheriff's officials, up to 30 people were involved in the first full day of the search. Rescuers, volunteers, rangers, and canines with dogs. By noon, a Tennessee National Guard helicopter was also involved, flying along the mountain range, scanning the forest edges with a thermal imaging camera. The weather remained clear and visibility was excellent. But the first few hours revealed a strange detail. The dogs were picking up James's trail from the camp where he'd spent the night, but quickly lost it at the point where Eric and Matt had last seen the friend. One of the dogs dragged the canine to a side trail that led down to a small waterfall, but almost immediately his sniffing was cut off. It was as if the man had disappeared at some point, leaving no scent or any trace of shoes. The sheriff of the county, Harold Wilkins, decided to expand the search area to a 3-kilometer radius from the supposed place of disappearance. During May 6th, 7, people literally combed the woods square by square. Nothing was found, no footprints, no scraps of clothing, no drop of blood, no signal from his phone. The water level in the creeks and rivers in the area was low, and the current was not too strong. Theoretically, even if the man had fallen into the water, the chance of finding him, or at least his personal belongings, seemed quite high. The diving team examined several ponds and pools in the channels, but all to no avail. In the course of the investigation, the police also checked so-called domestic versions, sudden suicide, staged disappearance, conflicts with friends, but there was nothing to suggest any such motives. Eric and Matt were literally heartbroken. They begged everyone to keep looking and not get suspicious. The sheriff had no reason to believe they were involved in the disappearance. A polygraph test administered to each of them revealed no lies in their accounts of what happened. James's family denied any depression or problems that might have prompted him to leave. On the contrary, he was excited about traveling, made plans for the summer, had a stable job, and no debts. Friends emphasized that although James was cautious, he was not an alarmist, and in critical situations he behaved coolly and logically. Injury or sudden indisposition could be assumed, but then why were there no cries for help or sounds of falling heard in the woods? A curious fact was also the GPS navigation technique, which had worked fine for the other two guys in those days, but James's phone had not given any signals since he had gone missing. The satellite link only picked up the morning dot. After 10:45, it was like the signal went dead. Cell tower analysis also found no pings of James' phone in the days that followed. 2 weeks of continuous search organized by authorities and volunteers yielded no results. The area around the trail was circled by helicopters, drones, and even small planes with survey equipment. The dogs, changing, circled the area again and again. Fatigue and despair enveloped those involved in the operation. Public attention to the story grew. Local media and news sites published reports. Volunteer Facebook pages urged people to participate in the search, but all to no avail. And then, on May 18th, exactly 14 days after the disappearance, what the sheriff later called the most puzzling detail of this case occurred. A group of volunteers patrolling the valley about 2 kilometers north of the main trail came across the man's body. The condition of the corpse did not suggest he had been lying there for many days in the open, but a forensic examination later gave no definite answer as to the time of death. Documents found in the pocket of his jeans allowed immediate identification of the deceased. It was James Carter. The place where his body was found was checked more than once as part of the search operation. Volunteers who surveyed that area a week ago swore he wasn't there. It was impossible to miss, one participant recalled. It's sparsely wooded, practically open space. Not to see a body that was lying right on the ground. There was no way that could have happened. Surprisingly, upon discovery, there were no obvious signs of decomposition or damage typical of 2 weeks in the forest in a warm climate. Temperatures during these days reached +25, +27 degrees C during the day, and this usually speeds up the decomposition process. The scene itself looked as if the body had been in the area relatively recently, or at least preserved in conditions that had not allowed the environment to change it quickly. There was no sign of insects, and birds hadn't touched the remains either. Another strange fact: James's clothes were almost intact, only his pants were slightly torn at the right knee. On his feet, his trekking boots, laces tied. The backpack was missing, and it was not found in this area or anywhere else. The cell phone was missing too. The pathologist's report, Dr. Mario Carver, was key to the case. Officially, he ruled death by undetermined cause. There were no stab wounds on the body, no severe contusions, no fractures indicating a fall from a height, no signs of strangulation or other violent impact. Toxicological analysis revealed no significant abnormalities. There were no traces of potent poisons, medications, or drugs in the blood. The only unusual detail was a slight swelling of the soft tissues around the neck and face, but this was not sufficient for a definite conclusion. It was not clear whether this swelling could have been the result of an allergic reaction or, for example, the result of external factors related to the natural environment. The authorities pondered the question for a long time. How did the body end up in a place that had been checked several times? How naturally could the deceased appear there if he disappeared on a trail 2 kilometers away? Perhaps he had somehow been alive all this time, and then walked out or reached that spot and died. But then, where had the backpack gone? And why hadn't there been a single clue to a run around the neighborhood? In late May 2014, the Monroe County Sheriff gave a press conference in which he announced, "We are suspending the active phase of the investigation and search for evidence because all resources have been exhausted. The case remains open, and if new information becomes available, we will resume." James's relatives accepted the fact of his death, but questions remained. What really happened, and why was the area where he was found repeatedly checked and failed? The media still remembered the case for a long time. from major TV channels covering the topic of mysterious disappearances on U.S. trails, to local publications and enthusiastic bloggers who collected and analyzed any mention of the details of the case. Periodically, witnesses would appear claiming to have seen lights in the sky or heard strange noises that night, but when verified, the information was not confirmed. James's family still has his collection of hiking gear and photo albums of past hikes in his memory. The parents, Tom and Lauren Carter, tried through social media to find other people who had encountered something similar on the Appalachian Trail. Dozens of users wrote to them, telling of sudden loss of connection, mystical experiences while hiking, and missing items, but none of these testimonies became a real lead. On July 19, 2011, a story began in Maine that will be debated in the hiking community for a long time to come. That day, 27-year-old Emily White, along with her boyfriend, Josh Rivers, went on a short day hike on a popular section of a mountain trail. The route was near one of the mountain range spurs where nature and adventure enthusiasts usually flock. According to Josh, an hour and a half to 2 hours before noon, they had already hiked most of the way, enjoying the gorgeous views. Emily stopped several times to take photos of the flowering meadows and pine trees that spread widely across the slopes. The route didn't have an official name, but among local hikers it was often referred to as the Country Lookout, not too difficult, but with impressive views of hills and valleys. It was mostly at altitudes of about 300, 400 meters above sea level, with gradual ascents. After a couple of hours of brisk walking, Emily felt a little tired and suggested we take a short break. Josh looked at the map and decided to check the location of the next trail sign to see exactly how far they had to go to a convenient lookout. He was only 3 minutes ahead, as he himself later told the investigators. "I literally ran to the turnoff and back. It wouldn't have taken more than 5 minutes if you count back and forth." But when he returned, Emily was gone. Her small snack bag was still on the rock where she just sat. Her water and phone were in her backpack, which she hadn't taken off. Josh didn't hear any screams or any sounds of a struggle. The terrain around them was generally screened, except for small patches of dense shrubbery and rocky ledges. He called Emily's name, skirted the nearest trees, peered over the edge of the trail, assuming she might have stepped away for a moment to take a spectacular photograph or to take a moment of privacy. But the minutes passed, and there was no answer. Emily White was born and raised in Portland, Maine. Her parents recalled that the girl from a young age was fond of music and theater, but also loved to spend time outdoors. When other children ran home from school to watch TV, she preferred outings into the woods. After graduating from college, Emily got a job in a small office dealing with insurance, but on weekends, she tried to go to the mountains, nature, camping, sometimes alone, more often with friends or with Josh. Josh and Emily met a year before the described events. Together, they attended a yoga studio, which was organized by their mutual friends. According to their friends, the couple looked very harmonious. Calm, friendly Emily, and more energetic but caring Josh complemented each other well. By the summer of 2011, they had already established a tradition of going hiking in Maine once a month. Most of these were short-day hikes, rarely overnight, but always carefully planned. Emily liked to prepare for hikes, read hiking guides, and check weather forecasts. Friends described her as a person without any signs of depression or suicidal thoughts. Absent, too, were conflicts in her relationship with Josh. She was full of plans. She wanted to pass for a hiking instructor in the fall, Emily's friend Sarah Ling said, recalling how they discussed the future together. Therefore, the version of Emily's voluntary departure into the woods did not resonate with relatives or acquaintances. Immediately after Josh realized Emily had disappeared, he first assumed she had gone further down the trail or deeper into a nearby grove. Leaving their shared belongings, except for his phone which was in his pocket, in plain sight, he quickly jogged back and forth along the trail calling Emily's name. But it was to no avail. Silence, no sign of presence or answering voice. Being a sensible man, Josh tried not to panic. He realized that the trail wasn't particularly long, and the visibility was decent in places. The chance of getting lost in 3 minutes and without a single shout seemed negligible. However, as he made his way back to the rest area, anxiety grew in his heart. He called 911. The connection, thankfully, was still catching, albeit erratically. The dispatcher replied that the nearest rangers would be on the scene, but asked Josh not to try to go too far on his own. In a sudden disappearance, it was always important to get a fix on a person's missing point. Within an hour, 2 rangers from the local Forest Service reached the edge of the trail in a jeep and walked up to Josh. Attempts to call out to Emily continued, but in vain. The sun was already crossing the midday high, and time was beginning to work against the searchers. By 3 p.m., several more rescue workers and 2 police officers had pulled up to the area. They examined the nearest cliffs, gaps in the woods, the creek, whether it flowed nearby, whether there were any signs of a fall. No clues, no noise, not a single object that could be linked to the missing girl. When it became clear that the search by the bare-knuckle rangers was fruitless, the county sheriff organized a full-scale search operation. Already by the evening of July 19th began to arrive volunteers, proven tourists, as well as cynologists with dogs. The headquarters was set up in a small campground at the foot of the mountain where all the participants gathered. The next morning, at dawn, the scouring of the terrain, divided into sectors, began. The most important task was to understand the landscape. Maine is known for its rocky hills and forests, which, although inferior to the majestic mountains of the western United States, can still present significant challenges. Rugged creek beds, granite cliffs, and dense undergrowth make it difficult to find. In addition, official maps of the area sometimes did not accurately indicate narrow trails used only by experienced enthusiasts. The dogs immediately picked up Emily's scent from the point where she was sitting, but after 70, 80 meters, they suddenly lost the trail. The canines suggested that the girl might have turned sideways, but no clear direction was recorded. Soon they called a helicopter from the nearest rescue squad to inspect the mountain slope and adjacent valleys from the air. The weather remained clear, visibility allowed to see anomalies in the tree crowns, places of debris, deep gorges. But alas, no results. As the days passed, the atmosphere around Emily's campground gradually changed. Journalists from the local media began to appear, photographing the tents and interviewing the volunteers. They all said pretty much the same thing. It's absolutely incomprehensible how someone can disappear without a trace in 3 minutes, even during the day, on an easy section of trail, in good weather and with tourists in the area. Locals who had long settled near the foot of the mountain were also perplexed. They mentioned in some interviews that they had heard of other cases of people going missing in the area, but never before so quickly and without a trace. The cliffs in Maine can reach moderate heights, but some cliffs are nearly vertical and require climbing experience. According to Josh's claim, there were no sheer cliffs or dangerous ledges where Emily disappeared. Everything looked relatively calm, just low rock ledges and a moderately sloping slope. The shrubbery and trees could conceal a man, but not so much that he could not be found in such a serious search operation. By July 22nd, 3 full days after the disappearance, search and rescue teams had checked a radius of about 8 kilometers around the point of disappearance. Volunteers placed markers on trees to make it clear which squares had been combed. Drones and a helicopter flew around the mountain twice in concentric circles, looking at every open plateau, every clearing. They found nothing. No trace of clothing, no campfire, no backpack, not even fresh shoe prints. At the same time, there was also a police check, whether Emily had any conflicts, quarrels, strange acquaintances. But this line of investigation led to nothing. Family and friends of the girl denied anything in this spirit. Josh was tested on a lie detector. He showed no signs of deception. According to him, he loved Emily and could not imagine for a second that she herself ran away or hid on purpose. Periodically sounded the version that she could have been kidnapped by someone, but to do so on a popular tourist route in broad daylight would have required acting with incredible speed and silence. Besides, none of the other hikers had reported any suspicious persons or vehicles in the vicinity. Once again, it was all about zero evidence. When 10 days passed, the searchers' efforts began to wane. Volunteers were exhausted. Emily's family was in a state of extreme despair. It was at this point on July 29th that they received a message from a team of climbers who who were training together on one of the hard-to-reach rocky areas northeast of the trail. The site was an almost sheer wall located at an altitude of about 500 meters above sea level. It was accessible only with special equipment, ropes, carabiners, hooks. And there, among the ledges, the climbers noticed something suspiciously similar to a human figure. The signal was immediately transmitted to the police and rescuers, and by evening a group capable of technical climbing arrived in the area. To the horror of all those involved in the operation, there was indeed a woman's body on a narrow stone shelf with almost no footing. The documents preserved in the inner pocket of her jacket confirmed it. It was Emily White. Her small backpack was lying next to her, leaning against the rock, the buckles intact. Emily herself was in a position as if crouched against the wall, facing the plumb line. Initial examination showed that there were no severe external injuries or bloody wounds on the body. But due to 10 days in the open air, it had begun to decompose. Nevertheless, experts assured that in the moderate humidity and sunny heat, the process was relatively rapid, but not so rapid as to completely hide any signs of injury. No obvious fracture of the limbs, characteristic of a fall from a great height, was found. Clothing was almost intact, only slightly soiled. The pants and boots were in normal condition with no significant damage. The inside pocket of the rucksack contained a cell phone, but it had been smashed, possibly by hitting rocks, so no data could be immediately extracted from it. A more detailed analysis later also yielded no answers. There were no recent photos or messages in the phone's memory that could shed light on Emily's last moments. The battery charge was long gone at the time of discovery. The most pressing question was how Emily could have ended up on this hard-to-reach rock. According to experienced climbers, it was impossible to simply get lost up there. Climbing required special equipment, and Emily didn't have any. In addition, none of the rescue teams that inspected mountain after mountain did not see a possible path that the girl could take alone. The forensic medical examination, which lasted about a month, formally ended with the conclusion, "The cause of death has not been determined." The pathologist's report stated that there were no obvious signs of strangulation or violent actions, but there were also no characteristic injuries from a fall from a height. It was noted that no toxins or poisons were detected in the body. Sheriff's Inspector John Hightower, after reviewing the results, only threw up his hands. "We can't say the death was violent, but we can't explain how she got there either." The news that Emily White had been found, after all, but in such an unexpected place, caused an outcry. Journalists seized on the story. A mysterious disappearance and an even more mysterious discovery. The relatives, having received Emily's body, organized a modest farewell ceremony attended by dozens of volunteers who helped in the search. Saying goodbye to his daughter, Emily's father, Mark White, pleaded with police to keep the case alive and continue the investigation, hoping that new evidence would be uncovered. The police were legally obligated to keep the case open, but without concrete leads, the investigation had few tools left. Josh Rivers, broken by grief, tried to cooperate with the authorities, but he was full of questions. Being interviewed again by the sheriff, he said, "I don't understand. She couldn't have been where she was found by accident or on purpose. Emily wasn't a rock climber, and if she had, she wouldn't have gone out alone." Soon, members of the search and rescue operation began sharing their stories and speculations on forums dedicated to mysterious disappearances. Some pointed to an anomalous disappearance, going missing in the middle of nowhere and being found in a place you can't get to without special skills and equipment. Others thought that perhaps Emily had been the victim of a kidnapping, and the body had simply been hidden on a cliff to cover her tracks. But there was not a single piece of evidence to support this theory. No signs of a struggle, no DNA, no clues to the presence of intruders. Emily White's case meets many of the criteria that are commonly cited in missing 411 stories. The lack of a logical explanation for the move, the complete incomprehensibility of the victim's behavior, and the inability to determine the exact cause of death. The police investigation, which lasted several months, ended with the wording, "The case remains open without sufficient data for an indictment." In other words, there is no official answer, neither in terms of motives nor details. Emily's family hired a private investigator, but he too found nothing to shed light on what happened. Locals continued to say that this area of the mountains has repeatedly demonstrated strange things. Someone heard strange sounds in the night. Someone lost their bearings even in the daytime. However, no objective facts explaining Emily's death were found. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for staying with us. If you liked it, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. See you in the next videos. Bye. National parks and dense forests are not only beautiful and quiet places. Here, among the trees and paths, sometimes strange things happen that make you feel frightened. People just disappear here without a trace, as if the forest itself takes them away. Imagine a quiet evening, you put up your tent, look at the sunset, and in a moment you are gone. Today we're going to tell you about two mysterious stories. The first is about Tom Haley, who disappeared right from his tent near Dragon's Tooth Rock during a severe thunderstorm. The second story is about a little boy, Kevin Rodriguez, who disappeared just seconds before his parents' eyes. Only his jacket was later found, an eerie reminder of the mystery that lurks in the woods. If you're interested in hearing more stories like this, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss out on new videos. Now let's get to the first story, which is sure to give you goosebumps. On April 15, 2017, 34-year-old Tom Haley suddenly disappeared near a well-known hiking trail near a rock formation that hikers call Dragon's Tooth. The area, located in Virginia's George Washington and Jefferson National Forest, has long been known for its beautiful hiking trails and stunning panoramas. Every year, hundreds of outdoor enthusiasts come here, but from time to time it is in these places that unexplained disappearances of people are recorded and under rather favorable conditions. The case of Tom Haley affected many people. His family and friends made every effort to find any trace of him, and the county authorities and volunteers spent months scouring the surrounding area trying to understand where a young and seemingly healthy man could have gone. Tom's story is remarkable because he disappeared right out of his tent, leaving his belongings, phone, and even his wallet intact. There was nothing to indicate that he had left voluntarily, and everything looked as if he had simply dissolved. No body, no living person, and not the slightest evidence was ever found. Tom Haley was born in 1983 in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. in 1983. According to his mother, Ellen Haley, from childhood he loved nature and tended to spend weekends hiking, fishing, or riding a mountain bike. During his school years, Tom was active in sports, especially track and field and cross country. By 2017, Tom was working as a system administrator for a small IT company in Richmond, Virginia. In doing so, he tried not to interrupt his passion for hiking. Once a month, or even more often, he would get out to the nearby mountainous areas, preferring solo or small group hikes. His friends recall that Tom usually approached traveling responsibly and always studied the weather forecast, a map of the area, and took the necessary equipment with him. In April 2017, Tom had a short vacation of 1 week. For family reasons, he was unable to go on a major outing with his buddies in West Virginia, so he decided to spend a couple days solo, hiking around Dragon's Tooth, a well-known section near the Appalachian Trail. His plan was to do some light camping in an area permitted for overnight stays, hike to the cliffs themselves, and maybe take a few photos from the scenic lookouts. His family saw nothing unusual in this. The mountains of Virginia are Tom's second home, and he had plenty of equipment and skills. According to correspondence with a friend, judging by text messages, which were later examined by the police, we know that Tom arrived at the trailhead on the morning of April 14th in his car. He parked his car in the official parking lot for hikers, grabbed his backpack, and left toward a camping spot about a kilometer from the main trailhead. The next morning, April 15th, he was seen by other hikers, a married couple from Roanoke, walking along the trail in the same direction. This married couple, Tom and Kathy Patterson, both in their 40s, recalled that on their way to Dragon's Tooth on the morning of April 15th, they met Tom Haley at the parking lot. He seemed friendly and open, greeted them, and asked if they had seen any signposts on the side trail. Kathy noted in her conversation with the police that she saw no signs of agitation or inappropriate behavior on Tom's part. He seemed alert, saying that he had spent the night in a tent and was going to be out on the trail in the afternoon to make it back before dusk. By noon, the news broke that forecasters predicted a severe thunderstorm for the evening of the day. Judging by the correspondence in travel chat rooms and the forecasts, a front, which often occurs in the mountains of Virginia in the spring, was indeed expected. People met along the way warned each other of possible heavy rain, thunder, and wind, recommending that tents be pitched under trees so that they would be protected from wind gusts. The Patterson family moved on, while Tom, they said, stayed behind to pack and planned to return to the trailhead closer to lunchtime. No one had any idea that this would be the last confirmed evidence of his presence in the area. According to the weather station, a rain system began forming on the afternoon of April 15th. Around 6 p.m., a downpour accompanied by thunderclaps and powerful wind gusts hit the county where the Dragon's Tooth site is located. The gusts reached 25-30 meters per second, which in everyday terms meant a severe storm capable of breaking tree branches and tearing down light structures. The terrain on mountainsides in such winds became extremely uncomfortable and potentially dangerous. In the same tourist chats, people actively shared warnings. Some wrote that they would turn to the nearest motel, some planned to camp in a more low-lying area and keep the tent very tightly secured. Alas, there is no record of whether Tom went online during this period. Communications in the mountains were getting weak, with cellular signals frequently lost in the area. Presumably, he stayed in his tent, hoping to wait out the storm. On the morning of April 16th, Kathy and Tom Patterson, returning from Dragon's Tooth, they had spent the night elsewhere at a tourist shelter, decided to check on Haley, whom they had met the day before. According to them, they found his tent in the same clearing where they had seen it on the morning of the 15th. However, the place looked as if there had been no movement. The zipper of the camping tent's canopy was folded down, some personal belongings were inside, a sleeping bag, a mat, a small backpack. Outside, a thermos and a bag of food stood by the fire. Tom's cell phone, according to Kathy, was generally lying on a small camping table, as if the man had just stepped out for a minute and had to return. The first thing the Pattersons noticed was that there were signs of the night's thunderstorm around the tent. Broken twigs, the ground eroded by the rain. But the tent itself was in the same place, its tent poles secured. It didn't look like it had been washed away by the water or blown away by the wind. One more unpleasant nuance: there was not a single soul in the neighborhood. The morning sun was gradually warming the damp soil, and there was silence, interrupted only by the sounds of birds. But Tom was nowhere to be seen. After waiting for half an hour, the Pattersons began to worry. They called Tom's name, circled a couple of nearby bushes and a small path going downhill, but found no sign of the man. Kathy recalled that everything inside the tent was neatly laid out. Tom's spare sneakers, his wallet, a small knife and flashlight all lay untouched. The couple decided that this looked like a problem and went to a place that had cell phone signal reception. They had to move a couple hundred feet away, closer to the main route, to call 911. So at 10:15 a.m. on April 16th, the first call sounded, reporting a likely missing hiker. Rangers and local police responded quickly. By noon on April 16th, several Forest Service officers, 2 police officers, and 2 volunteers from a local search and rescue team arrived at the site. They inspected the tent, photographed the situation, and took a few things from Tom's backpack that might be useful for finding the trail: clothes and a towel with his scent. The dog, specially trained to search for missing people, sniffed these things and started moving through the woods towards a side trail, but after 200-300 meters it lost anyone's scent. Rescuers said a severe thunderstorm could have washed away many of the tracks, especially if the person left at night or in the morning hours after a rainstorm. Tom's cell phone, which was left on the table, had a battery that was about half dead. Investigators noticed that it had several unread messages from a friend and his mother sent as late as the evening of April 14th and early morning on the 15th. It appears Tom didn't access his phone the night of the storm. The GPS signal was not working or inactive at that time. No notes or record of where he was going was found. The Dragon's Tooth area in Virginia is a rocky area known for vertical protrusions and unique landforms sticking out like fangs into the sky. The trail leading here is relatively popular, and part of it intersects with the Appalachian Trail, which stretches across several states. Many people come to see these stone spires and take spectacular photos. But despite its popularity, the surrounding forest itself can be treacherous. Some segments are in lowlands with drying creek beds and clusters of boulders. Other sections rise sharply upward to the Catawba Range and require hiking experience. In spring, there are often sharp storms here. Wet ground, slippery rocks, fallen branches after a hurricane wind can all create a suddenly dangerous situation for someone trying to navigate in poor conditions or at night. According to the forecaster's report, the storm may have caused localized flooding on the night of April 15th, 16, but water levels in creeks and rivers were not extraordinary. However, a downpour accompanied by strong winds is quite capable of disorienting a person. The sound of rain, thunder, and lightning often cause people to lose their way or panic, especially if they are caught unexpectedly. From April 16th to April 20th, operations to find Tom Haley went on uninterrupted. A mobile headquarters was brought to the base of the mountain with county sheriff's staff, volunteers, firefighters, and medics. The area was combed by sectors, and several canine units were deployed. A helicopter and drones with cameras flew over forested areas and rock ledges within a radius of about 5 kilometers from where the tent was set up. Normally, when a hiker goes missing, it's almost always possible to find some kind of circumstantial evidence. A lost water bottle, a scrap of cloth, fresh shoe prints on damp soil, broken branches indicating that the person had walked through the bushes. In this case, however, things were extremely strange. "We found exactly nothing," one of the volunteers later recounted, as if Haley had vanished. There wasn't even a trace of him along the creek bed. Although in a downpour, many people move closer to the water if they lose their bearings. The dogs couldn't pick up a clear trail either, and where it broke off, there was nothing to follow. Especially alarming was the fact that all his personal belongings, except for the clothes he was wearing, were left in the tent. His wallet, in a pocket of his backpack, contained more than $100 in cash and bank cards. The cell phone was on a separate table. Nothing indicated suicidal intentions. On the contrary, judging by the notebook where Tom wrote down the route, he had plans for the next days. Tom's parents, who arrived urgently from Richmond, pleaded with rescuers to check all possible trails. They insisted that their son would not have left his belongings behind for no particular reason. On the night of April 16th, 17, as the most extensive scouring of the forest began, the weather calmed down, but dropping temperatures added to the challenge. Light fog drifting across the lowlands made visibility difficult. Some searchers commented that it's easy to get lost in this fog, even if you have a compass and map with you. However, Tom was still not found, and he did not make contact. After several days of fruitless efforts, the county sheriff announced that the search area had been expanded to 10 kilometers from the parking lot. Mounted patrols were brought in, as some of the trails in the national park are easier to view on horseback. They even invited a diving team to check a couple of lakes and wetlands, but even there they did not find the slightest trace. For a while, the criminal version was considered. Could Tom have been kidnapped? But logically, it was incomprehensible. The parking lot was located not by the road, but deep in the forest. It was unrealistic to drive up unnoticed by a car on the night of a thunderstorm. Other campers who slept in the Dragon's Tooth area, and there were quite a few of them, did not hear any suspicious sounds, shouting or fighting noises. No one reported strangers behaving aggressively. In addition, there were no signs of a scuffle or blood at the scene of the disappearance. Tom's family and close acquaintances did not believe in the version of voluntary departure. He was not a man prone to running away or living a double life. He still had a stable job and planned projects in town. There were no mental abnormalities. The search periodically turned up people who claimed to have seen a man who looked like Tom Haley in various places in the woods and even farther afield in neighboring counties. Most of these witnesses were either confusing dates or describing someone who did not match outward appearances. None of the reports provided a concrete lead. Some volunteers began to share mystical speculation as well. The Dragon's Tooth site has been the subject of several reports of strange disappearances. In 2015, photographer Jonathan Clark disappeared, a case also widely discussed in the local media. A semi-legend has spread that there is some kind of anomalous zone here, because of which people supposedly disappear without a trace. Official authorities, of course, did not support such rumors, believing that every situation has a real explanation, albeit unknown at the moment. By May 10th, the sheriff announced that the active phase of the search was officially over. From the police report, all methods and resources have been exhausted. Further extensive operations are not possible within budget and reasonable planning, and there is no new evidence. Tom's family continued to search for their son even after this announcement, hired a private detective, involved the public through social networks, organized independent volunteer groups. But even these efforts did not yield results. Until today, Tom Haley has been reported missing. June 12, 2003, in one of the picturesque corners of West Virginia, tragedy occurred, which still stirs the imagination of locals and tourists. A little boy, 7-year-old Kevin Rodriguez, disappeared just a few steps away from his parents, in front of their eyes, and as if vanished into thin air. It happened near the historic town of Harper's Ferry, where the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers converge. The area itself is beautiful and popular with hikers, but it's in places like this that many people report the most unexplained disappearances. Parents and rescuers searched the surrounding area, police dogs were deployed, helicopters were raised, but Kevin was not found. The key point in this story was the fact that exactly a month later, at the same place where the boy disappeared, his jacket appeared, and neatly folded without traces of damage. This detail only strengthened the mystical aura around the disappearance and generated a lot of versions, from rational to the most fantastic. In this report, we will try to reconstruct the chain of events, gather facts from the testimonies of Kevin's parents, volunteers who took part in the search, as well as outline the course of the official investigation. Everyone who has read or heard such stories has wondered, how could a child disappear on a clear summer day, just a few meters away from adults, and still go missing after an extensive search? There's still no answer. The town of Harper's Ferry is located at the confluence of two rivers, the Potomac and the Shenandoah, on the border of the states of West Virginia, Maryland, and Virginia. This historic settlement played an important role in the Civil War, as evidenced by the preserved museums and forts. Today, Harper's Ferry attracts thousands of tourists each year. Some come for the historic streets, some for the spectacular views of the river and rocky shores, and hikers appreciate the opportunity to walk the famous Appalachian Trail nearby. The terrain itself around Harper's Ferry is a combination of rolling hills, low mountain slopes, and dense forests descending to the water. In summer, the climate is usually mild, with temperatures ranging from +25 to +28 degrees C during the day, although there are occasional spells of heavy rain or heat. But on June 12, 2003, the weather was clear, no fog, no strong winds. It seemed like a perfect day for a family outing. Kevin's parents, Mark and Lauren Rodriguez, are residents of Baltimore, Maryland. Mark was working at a large warehouse that year. Lauren was teaching at a local school. They often organized small trips to nature to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city, and usually took their son, Kevin. The boy was fond of drawing, loved reading books about animals, and dreamed of getting a dog. According to Lauren, Kevin was not a young, extreme, or reckless child. On the contrary, he was characterized by a calm, inquisitive character. His parents thought Harper's Ferry was a safe place for a little day trip. On the day of the disappearance, Mark, Lauren, and Kevin arrived in Harper's Ferry by 10 in the morning, parked near one of the official parking lots, and followed a scenic trail that led along the river hills. The plan was simple: walk for an hour or two, stop at a picnic area, and return home by evening. The morning was sunny and the air smelled fresh. There was no sign of trouble. According to their parents' testimony, around noon they approached a small wooded area where the trail made a turn. Kevin had been active all morning, running ahead, then coming back, talking about the birds he had seen, asking questions. His father walked behind him, his mother slightly ahead. At one point, Kevin asked his mom for water, but she said his dad had the bottle. Lauren looked back and saw Kevin turning around to his father, who was about 5 or 10 meters behind. At that minute, the boy, according to his mother, saw something behind the tree and ran toward the nearest thick trunk, out of sight for just a few seconds. Mark, busy adjusting the strap of his backpack, looked up and didn't notice his son. He didn't think that something terrible would happen. He assumed that Kevin was just hiding, playing hide and seek, but upon reaching the tree, Mark found no one there. After looking around and calling loudly for the boy, the parents realized their son wasn't responding. There was no panic at first. They thought Kevin had run off ahead down the trail or into the bushes to scare them, but they called loudly. The woods were not so dense that they should have heard any rustle or response, but the silence was absolute. In a couple of minutes they had circled the area around the tree, peering behind bushes, looking up and down the gentle slope. The boy was nowhere to be seen. This was already looking very strange. The longer the parents went without finding their son, the more the terror grew. Mark and Lauren split up, circling the nearest perimeter in a radius of about 50 meters, calling Kevin's name. Hearing no response, they began to suspect that he might have fallen, perhaps into a shallow ravine or creek bed that are periodically found in the area. But there was no sound of crying, no sign of a fall or broken branches. After 20 minutes of fruitless searching and shouting, they were joined by some random hikers who were passing along the same trail. Together they searched the nearby bushes and climbed a little higher up the slope, to no avail. Soon one of the hikers called the police and the Forest Service. The boy's parents were already on the verge of panic. Mark started screaming and running back and forth on the trail. Lauren was crying, begging for help. Thus began one of the largest search and rescue operations around Harper's Ferry in the last decade. Toward the evening of June 12th, several police crews, rangers, and the first group of volunteers arrived at the site of the child's disappearance. The Rodriguez family couldn't believe that Kevin had just disappeared into a clear sky in a split second. The Forest Service prepared a map of the area, and small groups of 5 people set out to scour the area square by square. Night caught up with them quickly, but people kept searching with flashlights, shouting Kevin's name. On the morning of June 13th, canine handlers with dogs joined the operation. It seemed that Kevin's fresh scent should be easily picked up, because he had disappeared recently. But the dogs took the trail near the tree where he was last seen, and literally after 10-15 meters lost the direction. As if he didn't go any farther, the cynologists were puzzled. Again and again they conducted sniffing operations, again coming across a dead end. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras were also called in. In summer, the forest is not too dense, especially when viewed from high up. It seemed that the boy could be found if he moved or lay down, but no results. Several days of aerial patrols recorded no sign of him. Police and volunteers eventually expanded the search radius to 2 and then 5 kilometers. They searched all the trails, ravines, riverbanks, and streams. When localized searches yielded no results, the authorities began to consider other theories. Could the child have been abducted by a criminal? On a clear day? On a popular trail? In a matter of seconds? The kidnapper would have had to move at lightning speed. Besides, none of the hikers reported either suspicious people or a car parked nearby. Some points can only be accessed via country roads. Another hypothesis is that the boy could have fallen into the water and the current carried him away. But it was quite a distance from the trail to the Potomac River, and swift streams don't flow in this area. Divers later checked several potentially dangerous spots along the stream beds, but to no avail. The parents suspected that perhaps Kevin had gotten lost after running away from the tree and wandered off somewhere, startled by the screams. But how fast could a 7-year-old run away without being spotted? And the dogs should have smelled the trail anyway. The forest remained calm, the clear weather aiding the search, but the search was fruitless. The boy seemed to melt away. The most disturbing detail in this case was an event that occurred a month after the disappearance, July 12, 2003. Around the same time of day, Mark and Lauren, along with 2 friends and a volunteer, decided to go to that spot again to honor their son's memory. And suddenly they saw something. According to them, they stopped at the same tree where Kevin was last seen. And there, neatly folded on the grass, lay his light jacket, the same one Kevin had worn on the morning of June 12th, but had taken off when it got warmer. The jacket was in perfect condition, not torn, not stained with dirt. Inside the pocket was a flattened snack packet. It was as if someone had given it to his parents and left it in a prominent place. But between June 12th and July 12th, dozens of search parties, volunteers, rangers, and journalists had walked the site, and no one had seen the jacket. There was definitely nothing there before, people who regularly walked the trail asserted in one voice. But on July 12th, the thing appeared suddenly. Police responded, examining it for traces of DNA or hair, nothing but Kevin's own fingerprints. There were no bloodstains or evidence of kidnapping. The dogs sniffed the area around her again, but were inconclusive. The impression was that the jacket had simply materialized in the area. The case instantly made local and even national news. The disappearance of a child is always a high-profile occasion, and even more so under such mysterious circumstances. Kevin's parents have given several interviews, begging anyone who knows anything to come forward with information. Alas, the hotline has only received calls from people who have supposedly seen the boy somewhere far away, but these reports have not been confirmed. Media coverage often brought up the issue of missing 411, an unofficial term for mysterious missing persons cases in American forests. Despite police skepticism, many enthusiasts began to claim that there was some kind of anomalous zone in the Harpers Ferry forest where people could go missing. Rational analysts countered that the cause was more likely due to flawed searches, the deception of eyewitness memory, or a rare chain of coincidence. But be that as it may, the actual facts remained frighteningly scant. No body, no live boy, no discernible trace. Over the next few years, 2004 to 2005, there were occasional reports of finds of children's clothing at various locations around the state of West Virginia. Police checked them out, taking DNA samples. None of these locations had anything to do with Kevin Rodriguez. There were also rumors that a homeless man had allegedly confessed to kidnapping the boy, but a check showed that it was a mentally unstable person who was out of touch with reality. As time went on, the case went quiet. Kevin's parents continued to try to keep the public's attention, handing out flyers, talking to search and rescue team organizers. But the farther away from the date of the disappearance, the less chance there was that the boy would be found. 20 years later, no new evidence has emerged. The criminal case is still technically unsolved. Kevin Rodriguez is officially still wanted as a missing person. From time to time, his family files requests to update search information. Sketch artists have tried to predict what the boy might look like as an adult, but no witnesses recognize them as anyone real. That's it. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a like. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new mystery stories. Write in the comments what other mysteries of nature you would like to learn. See you soon.